Korea. The defense secretary insisted the U.S. will not accept a nuclear North Korea. Mattis warned that any use of nuclear weapons by the North would be met with a, quote, massive military response that is effective and overwhelming. Now, as the president prepares to head to the region, North Korean officials say they will not give up their nuclear program. CNN's Will Ripley is in Pyongyang to explain.
As Asia prepares for President Trump's landmark visit, North Korea has been uncharacteristically quiet. No missile launches in a month and a half. No nuclear test, at least not yet. Only North Korea's promise to send a clear message after Trump's menacing speech at the UN last month when he threatened to totally destroy North Korea. At the time, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un vowed to tame the U.S. president with fire. Cha Song-chol is chief engineer of a baby food factory, trying to maintain production levels despite UN sanctions over North Korea's nuclear program. But he says the nukes are here to stay. President Trump knows nothing about the Korean nation, he says. Now he's asking us to give up our nuclear weapons. Ask anyone on the street and they'll say he's a lunatic. His words echo North Korean propaganda. Anti-Trump posters are all over Pyongyang. U.S. and North Korean officials say diplomacy has broken down as the rhetoric has revved up, pushing two nuclear powers further down a dangerous path. Both sides not ruling out talks altogether, but their positions couldn't be farther apart. On a visit Friday to the demilitarized zone dividing North and South Korea, U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis said America's goal is not war.
Thank you.
But for a nuclear-free Korean peninsula. But with Pyongyang closer than ever to achieving what it considers a nuclear balance of power with the U.S., giving up nukes is a non-starter.
But you know, there are a lot of people around the world who think that by accumulating nuclear weapons, your country is putting itself at risk of total destruction.
They have the wrong information, says Pak Son-ok. Tell them to come to my country and see for themselves.
Do you have hope that someday your leader, Kim Jong-un, could meet the U.S. President, Donald Trump?
No, not at all, she says. That meeting cannot happen. It will not happen, because our marshal promised to deal with that deranged lunatic with fire. Ominous words slowly simmering ever since. As Trump's visit to the region looms, many wonder if the situation is about to boil over.
Years after JCPOA Adoption Day. JCPOA is the deal. Adoption Day was October 18, 2015. So by that agreement, on October 19, 2023, they get a green light to develop a nuclear weapon with nuclear ballistic missiles.
Right. Well, let me come back to that. But let's go back to a phrase in that last provision that you just read. And I don't mean to sound like we're in law school parsing contracts, but it says no ballistic missiles designed to carry nuclear warheads. A clear example, as I'll show here in a second, of how badly drafted this agreement is from the American point of view. What Iran says is, oh, my goodness, our rockets aren't designed to carry nuclear weapons, as if it matters to the rocket part of the missile what's in the nose cone, a balloon, a basketball, or a nuclear weapon. And Iran says, you know, of course they're not designed to carry nuclear weapons because, after all, we don't have a nuclear weapons program. I mean, this is the kind of thing that, that really just makes a mockery out of the idea that this deal is in America's interest. But on the end date for the provisions of the deal, and this point applies to the nuclear deal as well, it's not the end date that's a problem. It's the flaws in the deal and the enforcement of the deal. Let's not forget, Iran is also a party to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which commits it not to seek or possess nuclear weapons. The reason we need this deal at all, in theory, is because Iran has been violating the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty for 25 years or more, just like it's violating this deal. It doesn't matter how many pieces of paper the Iranian regime engages in. They're going to have this nuclear weapons program until they get the capability that North Korea is on the verge of getting right now.
That is, and you talk about the North Korean similarity. The Iranian opposition, the National Council of Resistance of Iran, Maryam Rajavi is the head of that. They issued this statement that says, in part, about this: the clerical regime has devoted a significant budget to its program, while the majority of the Iranian people live below the poverty line. This program is solely for the regime's survival and is against the prime interests of the Iranian people. The clerical regime is spending billions of dollars on its missile program. Do you have any doubt, Ambassador, that spending billions of dollars is not unintended to produce a nuclear weapon?
Well, they know exactly what they're doing, and let's not forget, Iran and North Korea have been working together for 25 years, if not more, from the time that North Korea sold Iran the first Scud missiles. They're both using the same Soviet-era missile technology as they develop and advance their missile capabilities. They're both using the uranium enrichment program that they purchased respectively from AQ Khan, the great Pakistani nuclear proliferator. They're both using the same nuclear weapons design, also purchased in both cases from AQ Khan. I mean, these two nuclear and missile programs are really two sides of the same coin.
And finally, quickly, to stop Iran, is it even possible?
Well, I think it is, but I think continuing this nuclear deal, which we're now sort of in a slow death march with, isn't going to do it. As long as Iran has this deal, it's in Fat City.
Fat City for Iran. Ambassador John Bolton, thank you for being with us. You're with us every Sunday. Really always appreciate it.
Thank you, Eric.
Of course.
Investigation. So, you know, I don't think a lot of people are expecting collusion charges or anything like that tomorrow. They think it's just, you know, one smaller step in a long road of this investigation.
Yeah, and then, of course, collusion itself, as Attorney General Michael Mukasey reminded us earlier in the program, that that's not a crime in and of itself. So
right.
It could be potentially, there's been speculation about Michael Flynn's son. All have denied any wrongdoing, of course, so I guess we'll just have to see. Meanwhile, the president is expressing confidence. Ty Cobb, his lawyer, has an interview in the New York Times. Let me read you what Ty Cobb says about all this. He says, quote, "The president has no concerns in terms of any impact as to what happens to them on his campaign or on the White House." Mr. Cobb said none of the White House documents turned over to Mr. Mueller showed evidence that anyone colluded with Russia or that Mr. Trump tried to obstruct justice. The president is fully cooperating with the special counsel, he said. So what type of reaction do you think we'll get tomorrow from Sarah Sanders and the White House? Indeed, any indictment comes down.
You know, it's interesting. The White House has tried to, like you just said, kind of brush off that there was any kind of collusion, say there's no evidence of this, things like that. And they've also tried to point fingers at Democrats and say, look what Hillary Clinton did on the campaign. You know, her campaign committee helped fund this dossier on President Trump. From President Trump's perspective, I think everyone's going to be watching his Twitter account tomorrow because that's, you know, where his reaction truly comes from. It doesn't really matter what Sarah Sanders says from the White House podium if Donald Trump is tweeting something different. And today he didn't really talk about the indictment specifically, but he did tweet that Democrats are trying to distract from Republicans' big tax reform efforts on the Hill by continuing this focus on Russia.
Yeah, I mean, he's been talking about Uranium One. He's been talking about the Democrats. Some of his tweets. Let me read something to you. This is from the president. "Never seen such Republican anger and unity as I have concerning the lack of investigation on Clinton-made fake dossier." He also tweeted, "Instead, they look at phony Trump-Russia collusion, which doesn't exist," he says. "The Dems are using this terrible and bad for our country witch hunt for evil politics, but the R's are now fighting back like never before. There is so much guilt by Democrats Clinton, and now the facts are pouring out. Do something," he says in caps. So finally, I mean, could this potentially, or is it far too early to have any result on Uranium One or the Democratic National Committee or anybody who potentially paid on the Democratic side for that dossier?
You know, I think it's far too early to kind of draw any conclusions on that. Republicans have launched investigations into those issues this past week, so those things will be looked into again. But, you know, you have to keep in mind that Republicans are also in the majority in the Senate and the House, and they're the ones that are leading investigations on their intel committees and the Senate Judiciary Committee into potential collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia and Russian meddling in general. So while President Trump does tweet that Republicans are united against this Democratic witch hunt, Republicans are the ones that are in charge of these investigations on the Hill. So, you know, I mean, it kind of cuts both ways on that.
All right, and we'll see what happens tomorrow. 24 hours, everyone waiting with bated breath, I guess, and we'll see if someone ends up in handcuffs and before the judge. Heather Cagle, Politico, thank you.
Thank you so much.
For the Clinton campaign and the DNC, at least partially funded that opposition research dossier into then candidate Trump. John Podesta and Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who was the head of the DNC at the time, they both say they had no idea that they were funding the dossier, looking into President Trump's connections to Russia. Do you believe them?
Well, what I've been hearing for months, and not just in the last few days, is that this thing was originally opposition research begun by Republicans during the primary period, and I think that's been confirmed in the last few days. And then after the primaries were over, in effect, the opposition research was turned over to the Democrats. And, you know, I don't know who funded it or how it was funded, but it wasn't a surprise to me, because that was what I understood had happened. And as Governor Christie said, unfortunately, in this day and age, opposition research is part of the political process, and it goes on, you know, all the time amongst both parties. And in fact, in this case, it was an opposition research product that was partially funded by the Republicans at the beginning, and then at the end was funded by the Democrats.
Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown is urging his fellow Democrats to work with President Trump on a plan to cut taxes for working families. You're on the Senate Budget Committee. Where do you come down on the issue? Do you think a deal is possible with President Trump on the tax issue?
Well, I think a deal is possible. One of the odd things about the process that we're undertaking now is it's just like health care. It's all being done entirely behind closed doors by Republicans, only by Republicans. I can tell you, I'm not a Democrat. I'm an independent, but I do meet with the Democrats. And there's a majority of the Democratic caucus that wants to do tax cuts. It's just a question of how are they funded, how are they directed, who will get the benefits. So I think there is a deal there. And hopefully that's the direction we'll go in, instead of trying to jam down some massive unfunded tax cut that'll only add to our kids' deficits.
Your colleague, Senator Lindsey Graham, a Republican from South Carolina, said on Friday that if the Republican Party doesn't pass tax reform, Democrats will win back the House, and then they will attempt to impeach President Trump. Take a listen.
Well, I think all of us realize that if we fail on taxes, that's the end of the Republican Party's governing majority in 2018. I can't imagine how he could be successful with Nancy Pelosi running the House. They'd try to impeach him pretty quick.
Is Senator Graham right about this?
Again, I'm not a Democrat. I haven't heard any talk to that effect. I don't know what I don't know where that goes. I think President Trump is transactional. He likes to do deals. I mean, that's his whole career. And again, on taxes, I think there's a deal there to be had. It may not be massive and the biggest in history, but I wish we could skip this jam down phase and move to the bipartisan discussion phase. And I think we could get something done, and he could claim success.
Senator Angus King, independent of Maine, thank you so much for your time. Always good to see you, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Jake.
President Trump still focused on Hillary Clinton and her emails, now making it clear to the State Department that he wants any remaining Clinton emails released, and quickly. That's next.
Mrs. Andrews, I found the perfect.
We've seen this before, deflection, distraction, turn it around into something else. Donald Trump is still obviously obsessed with playing the Clinton card, running against Hillary Clinton. But I do think, we're going to see a change tomorrow. It's going to move from if in fact these charges do come down, we're going to see this move from the realm of politics and tweeting and speculation to the law and facts. So I think you're going to see an extraordinary day tomorrow. And I think it's really a maximum peril when you think about it, because as you point out, as you've been pointing out all morning, I think that you saw Trump, the Trump White House and the Trump media really prepping the battlefield to discredit this investigation and possibly even laying the groundwork to fire Bob Mueller. And that is going to be a real test for Republicans who claim to believe in the rule of law.
Do you think it's possible, Senator, that President Trump might fire Bob Mueller? And if so, what would the response be, do you think?
Well, no, I don't think it's possible, at least at this point, that he's going to fire, particularly now that you have a charge coming forward, and obviously grand jury was able to provide an indictment. I think it's going to be very perilous for the president to do something like that, but I don't think they're going to stop the narrative, nor is Congress going to stop the narrative, that there are other things for Bob Mueller to be looking at with respect to the Clintons and the DNC and all the things that were going on there that seem to be much more evidence of cooperation with Russia than what we've seen so far from the Trump administration.
Governor?
It's just so ridiculous. Yeah, she colluded with Russia to lose the election. I mean, it's just so stupid. When I was a federal prosecutor, Jake, and attorney general, when we brought cases, we would look for direct evidence and we'd look for someone's mental state as well. And if someone was doing consistently things to throw people off the trail, if they were attacking, of course, the investigator, it's all evidence of a state of mind, a guilty state of mind. Every time he tweets about emails, about uranium, about Hillary Clinton, it's all further evidence. If you were innocent, you would say to Robert Mueller, come on in. I don't want anybody who has colluded with Russia in my administration. I want them prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Instead, he's doing everything possible to distract, to divert, and now this undercurrent to get rid of the prosecutor.
Turner, distraction though it may be, it's also one of the reasons, this idea that during the middle of this deal, and we should point out it was a 9-agency panel that okayed the Uranium One deal, not just the State Department, although that was one of them. But during that period, President Bill Clinton did go to Russia and give a speech for $500,000. People invested in the program, Uranium One, had been giving millions of dollars literally to the Clinton Foundation since 2009. This is one of the things, one of the reasons why Sanders supporters didn't trust Hillary Clinton.
I mean, the perception is heavy, but as you pointed out, Jake, the Committee on Foreign Investments looked at this. The Treasury Department manages this interagency process. I think the bigger question, and the State Department could not make the decision just alone. The question becomes, would Secretary Condoleezza Rice have done the same thing, or other Secretary Kerry, would he have done the same thing in terms of being somebody that weighed in on this? But the Secretary Clinton did not weigh on this. That's what the evidence shows. Yeah. And the point, I think the larger point is, other agencies led by the Treasury Department, it's important that our viewers understand this. But to me, the biggest question is, why didn't anybody say anything about this? I mean, the fact that a Russian company now owns 20% or controls 20% of our uranium extraction and has de facto and de jure exercise. They can control whether or not it's extracted or not extracted.
They own the rights to it.
To me, that is the bigger question, not one agency.
But you can believe two things. You can believe this was a very, very disturbing deal that we ought to look into, and also think that it's completely irrelevant to what's going on right now, that you can be disturbed by that, but also recognize that there's really no new developments in that story. And why would this have become a big story the week before the first indictments would come down? So again, you don't have to say there's nothing here, but you can also say this is a complete distraction from this real story of the Russian interference in the election.
In fact, this was raised during the election, and it was investigated. And fact checkers have said there is nothing to Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton did not even sit on the committee. It was
and
an
the Pentagon didn't object, Jake, and neither did the Department of Homeland Security.
Said that she had nothing to do with it.
Okay, with three of you saying this is a distraction, let's turn to what we're expecting tomorrow, which is we are expecting, if not an arrest, somebody to go willingly into federal custody. And this has got to be something that's concerning for people who support President Trump, because whether or not it proves collusion, whether or not it proves, and President Trump might have no knowledge of anything that's going on, it's still something of a black eye for those saying that there was nothing there.
Well, maybe. I mean, we still don't have any evidence of quote collusion. I mean, there's all this. There's been a lot of smoke, but really no fire with respect to that. And I suspect that, although I have no idea who's going to be indicted, I suspect it's probably going to be someone down the food chain that they're trying to then leverage to get more information to try to indict farther up. But I don't see anything that approaches getting close to Trump. I agree with Jennifer that all of the reaction of the president, it would be a typical reaction if someone's guilty. But I don't think Donald Trump is typical. I think Donald Trump just reacts to anybody who goes after him. So I don't necessarily agree with Jennifer that that's some indication of guilt. I think it's an indication of a president who doesn't like to have anybody say anything bad about him, and he's responding.
There's a whiff of panic coming from Trump world.
I disagree with that. Look, I'm in Trump world. I mean, I interact with those people. I don't feel that panic whatsoever, because I don't think that anybody feels there's any evidence or any reality reality that this occurred.
There were some people who are in the Trump world, not in the respectable side of the Trump world that you're in, but the Roger Stone side of the Trump world, that were clearly took to Twitter and were showing some sort of signs of something going on. Roger Stone was attacking so many members of CNN in such a threatening fashion, he was actually kicked off Twitter, apparently permanently. It does seem, you heard Preet Bharara say, watch President Trump, see what he does. Is that something you're going to be doing this week?
It's going to be exciting coming from the Mr. President Trump's Twitter world. If it can go get any more, epic is the word. It will be epic tomorrow. So,
although I will say, I mean, he hasn't really tweeted this weekend about the Mueller investigation, which is interesting. And his attorney, Ty Cobb, did an interview on the New York Times' podcast, and he was actually really good. He was the way Trump should be, which is, come on in, everybody should look at whatever there is. I mean, if he's saying that and he's got Trump's ear, then maybe things calm down. But I think that the president has no ability to do that. And I would say this about his supporters as well. I mean, the supporters should look at what Ty Cobb is saying rather than going off on all of this crazy stuff about, Hillary Clinton and emails again. And we're going to start now another investigation into her emails when you've got 70% of people in Puerto Rico without power. You've got tell me, they've got to behave.
Look, the president's focused on trying to get a tax bill. I think that's been his principal focus now for the past several weeks. The idea that one House committee is going to do an investigation is somehow not going to take care of the problem in Puerto Rico is sort of ridiculous.
Well, it's not being
the bottom line is that Donald Trump is going to weather through this, and things are going to turn around if he can pass a tax bill. It's going to turn around if we can pass a health care bill come the 1st of next year. And all of these other issues about Donald Trump and his tweeting and Donald Trump and his character are going to fall by the wayside once the issue shows that he can actually
I'm old
deliver.
enough to remember when Rick Santorum cared about character.
I didn't
when
say
he said character matters.
Character does matter.
I don't understand. I mean, I
I'm
understand
not suggesting that it doesn't matter. I'm suggesting what's going to happen.
I understand why conservatives support his agenda on tax cuts and a variety of things. What I don't understand is how conservative Republicans feel the need to rationalize, defend, and enable the possible hacking of our election by Russians.
That's the end of that. Thanks,
or should we say walls have gone up along a short stretch of the U.S. border with Mexico. 8 prototype walls commissioned by the Trump administration officially unveiled this week. And one of them could serve as a blueprint to carry out President Trump's vision for the border. CNN's Miguel Marquez explains.
President Trump said he wanted a big, fat, beautiful wall. These are his 30 by 30 foot options.
One of these 8 contestants could soon stretch 2,000 miles across the border.
There's a chance that one of them gets selected, 8 of them get selected, or a mix of their characteristics gets selected for construction.
They sit like giant tombstones just east of San Diego in the no man's land right on the U.S.-Mexico border. The president has consistently said a wall will be built along the entire border.
He says 2,000 miles of border wall. You say we'll put it up where we need.
Well, there's testimony already out there. There was a testimony by the former chief of Homeland Security, which was General Kelly, in which he in testimony said that you won't see a wall from sea to shining sea. We will put the wall where it makes sense.
Customs and Border Patrol deferring to the same John Kelly, who is now the president's chief of staff. The cost for just these test walls, $20 million. Building any one of them and cross the entire 2,000-mile border could cost more than $20 billion.
Beyond this, whether the $20 billion to build the entire wall comes, that's for another day.
So right now, our focus is to complete the process of construction of the prototypes.
So the prototypes, or the contestants for the president's big, beautiful wall, they're done. But it's going to take another month for the cement to dry and for the walls to settle before they can be tested. And then they'll go at them, seeing whether they can be scaled, climbed, dug under, or breached. You will test these walls to their maximum.
Correct.
On the Mexican side of the border, building of the prototypes met with disbelief.
So when you see these, what do they represent to you?
Well, for our country, we think it's an insult.
Victor Clark Alfaro, a Mexican citizen who teaches border issues at San Diego State University, says a 30-foot wall would deter migrants, but not everything.
will a 30-foot wall, 2,000 miles long, stop drugs coming into the U.S.?
Well, drugs enter to the U.S. in different ways, through port of entries, to sea, by land.
And tunnels. Lots of them.
If we could take a picture of the land, of the ground underneath us, what would it look like?
With a lot of tunnels, obviously, and probably in this moment somebody's building a tunnel.
At least some of these walls come with tunnel deterrence too. Big, beautiful walls above and below ground. Miguel Marquez, CNN, Tijuana, Mexico, and Otay Mesa, California.
Has now wrapped up a three-nation tour of Africa amid escalating concerns of extremism in that part of the world. Her visit follows the ambush in Niger that killed 4 U.S. soldiers. In an exclusive interview with CNN's global affairs correspondent Elise Labott, Ambassador Haley talks about how extremism in Africa could impact the U.S.
These African countries and all countries, if they take care of their people, if they respect the voices of their people, then you get true democracy. If they don't listen to the voices of their people, conflict will erupt, extremism will happen, and the United States will have to deal with it. This is all about making sure we don't get to that point.
This as we are learning more details now about that deadly October 4th ambush in Niger. Sources tell CNN the U.S. troops became separated during the firefight and attempted to mount a counterattack. CNN's Ryan Brown has been following all the details. And Ryan, what have we learned now about what these U.S. troops were up against in this battle?
Well, Anna, we know that they were up against a larger, better armed force of some 50 ISIS-affiliated fighters. U.S. intelligence believed it's a group called ISIS in the Greater Sahara, and they were armed with rocket-propelled grenades, mortars, heavy machine guns, facing a smaller U.S. Nigerian force armed primarily just with their personal rifles. Yet despite this, forces were able to mount a counterattack and kill some 20 ISIS militants, but during the attack, early on, one of their vehicles was disabled. The U.S. force was split in two. They lost communication with one another, adding to the confusion of this battle. And we are told that one of the groups that was separated had some of the casualties the U.S. suffered in it. So again, a lot of confusion here in this very intense firefight in this remote part of Niger.
What about the timeline on Sergeant LaDavid Johnson? Have you learned any more about why he was missing for a whole 48 hours before his body was recovered?
Well, that's the main question that the investigation, which is being led by a 2-star general from Africa Command, is looking at. Now, one thing we know is that actually the White House was initially told that all 4 soldiers could be missing. That was in the initial reports. That was later revised by the military to 3 killed in action, with only 1 missing, and that's, of course, Sergeant LaDavid Johnson. So again, what they're trying to find out is how there was some movement between the 2 groups. They were on foot, they were in vehicles. So they're just trying to find out how he was missing for that length of time.
And there was the coordination, obviously, of the ISIS-affiliated fighters seems to suggest that they are well-trained and organized. Is the U.S. currently prepared to counter the ISIS factions in Niger and other African regions?
Well, that's something U.S. military planners are looking at. You know, they had done about 30 patrols in this area without encountering enemy contact. The force was not a a capture-kill operational force. They were not given that mission. This was a reconnaissance patrol force, not expecting enemy contact. The U.S. military has requested armed drones for Niger. It's a request that has not been granted yet by the Nigerian government. That's something they had been working on for some time because of this threat, and they're working on it with even greater urgency in the wake of this attack.
Ryan Brown, thank you for that.
As he wants his constituents to get the tax cuts they deserve.
There's a philosophy down in Washington that we are being subsidized by the federal government, allowing this deduction. In fact, New York is a donor state. For every dollar we send to Washington, we only get 79 cents worth of federal aid back, or federal resources back. So we're a donor state. No one's subsidizing New York.
For more now, let's bring in David Hawkins. He is the senior editor for Roll Call. David, always good to talk to you.
Thanks, Arthel.
So we'll start here, the bumpy or smooth path forward. What lawmakers are willing to give a little bit. We'll talk about them. And what is it that they're wanting to get in return, David? And is what they're asking for within the realm of possibility?
Wow, there's many questions there. Well, it's going to be a bumpy road for sure. I mean, if this was the easy one, right? The vote to even pave the way for the tax cut was what they voted on this week. The purpose of that budget was essentially to create a speedy process for getting a tax cut through Congress. Some people might remember this happened during health care. The idea is that you can't filibuster the health care bill in the Senate, so it could have in theory passed with just Republican votes. This vote this past week was the same thing to do with the tax cut, to make it free of a filibuster so that it could pass on party lines. We should note here that historically, since World War II, no tax cut has passed entirely along party lines. Most of them have been with big bipartisan support. That doesn't seem to be the way it's shaping up now. It seems to be that President Trump and the Republican leadership want to do this just with Republican votes. They have a very, very narrow margin for error, as we saw in Obamacare in the Senate and as we saw this week with 20 Republicans saying no just to the idea of a tax cut because they fear this one provision to do with the deductibility of state and local taxes.
Right. And so what happens then, David, when you throw lobbyists in the mix?
Well, right, exactly. Not just one lobbyist, but virtually every lobbyist in the country. I mean, the tax cut that they're talking about, the tax bill they're talking about, is not just a tax cut, but they're talking about overhauling the whole tax code, and doing so very quickly. They're supposed to release this bill on Wednesday. So far, we only have the big bullet points of the big things. The lobbyists are clamoring to find out all the fine print. There are going to be thousands of lobbyists. Everybody in the economy is going to be affected by this, so every lobbyist in town is going to be affected by this. They're all going to want something to tweak this bill one way or the other. And if what happened on just this one issue, the idea of potentially this tax cut being paid for by eliminating the deductibility of state and local taxes, prompted such an uprising, imagine what's going to happen when there is not one, not two, not three, but many dozens of similar proposals.
And so, as we've been saying, David, House Republicans narrowly passed the Senate budget resolution Thursday, which would allow tax reform to increase the deficit by $1.5 trillion over 10 years. So there's that. Plus, there are unresolved issues. Apart from what you're talking about with the lobbyists, we'll be looking at the fine print. There are unresolved issues that linger. Talk about those.
Oh, well, so there are lots of unresolved issues. As I say, the deductibility of state and local taxes. Places like New York and New Jersey particularly, where most of those votes against the budget were Republicans from New York and New Jersey. Those are high tax states. So is California, where they pay a lot in state and local taxes. If you live in one of those states, you can take what you pay to the state and local governments off your taxes. That's a big deal. How much you'll be able to contribute with tax advantages to your 401k retirement plan is another huge deal. That's one area in which the president himself and the Republican leadership also seems at odds. President Trump has signaled he doesn't think that limitation should be increased. The Republicans say, well, we got to come up with some sort of offsetting way to to keep ourselves within that $1.5 trillion price tag. That might have to be one. There are going to be, as I say, just dozens of other ones on everything from charitable contributions. I mean, you name it. Anything in that 1,000-page rule book in the IRS, we don't know exactly how many of those things they're going to tweak with, but each one will be a fight.
Right, and the lawmakers are going to be looking out for their folks, their constituents in the middle class, too.
That's right. And we haven't even talked about the Democrats, Arthel. The Democrats are just sitting back and waiting. They're saying what they always say, which is anytime the Republicans try to cut taxes, they say it's about the middle class, but it always ends up being about the rich. That's their very simple message. We'll see if they stick to that or whether any of them show any interest in trying to cut a deal here.
So there are lots of deals to be made, possibly still some division in place regarding tax reform. Will this ultimately be a single-party law if passed?
I think that's certainly the way it's looking right now. I think the best bet is that if the Republicans, for right now, the Democrats are going to sit back and say, you Republicans, this is your idea, you figure it out. If they figure it out and they can sort of prove that they can pass this bill entirely with Republican votes, then maybe a few sort of moderate conservative Democrats, especially in the Senate. There are 4 centrist Democratic senators who are in tough re-election fights next year. If it looks like this bill is going to pass anyway, then maybe a couple of those Democratic senators, Heitkamp from North Dakota, Manchin from West Virginia, Donnelly from Indiana, for example, might vote yes. McCaskill from Missouri, she'd be the fourth one.
So all of that checkerboarding, if you will that get in the way, David, of a finalized bill being on the president's desk by the end of the year?
That's an incredibly good question. I mean, they're talking about doing this with incredible speed when in comparison to other big bills of any kind, let alone a tax bill. The president wants this done by the end of the year. There are really only 7 weeks of legislating left in the year after Wednesday. Wednesday, November 1st is when the House wants to put this out. There is no deadline. It's not like there's some sort of deadline for tax bills having to get done. This could get done anytime in the next year, essentially. But the Republicans think, and the president seems to think, that doing it fast is in their best interest. The faster they move, the less the lobbyists can get in their way. The president, of course, is really, really eager for a big legislative victory in 2017. But that could work both ways. It could just cause the explosion to happen all the more quickly, and this thing could just get totally stuck.
Oh, that's a whole bunch. David Hawkins.
President Trump knows nothing about the Korean nation, he says. Now he's asking us to give up our nuclear weapons. Ask anyone on the street and they'll say he's a lunatic. His words echo North Korean propaganda. Anti-Trump posters are all over Pyongyang. U.S. and North Korean officials say diplomacy has broken down as the rhetoric has revved up. Pushing two nuclear powers further down a dangerous path. Both sides not ruling out talks altogether, but their positions couldn't be farther apart. On a visit Friday to the demilitarized zone dividing North and South Korea, U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis said America's goal is not war.
Thank you.
But for a nuclear-free Korean peninsula. But with Pyongyang closer than ever to achieving what it considers a nuclear balance of power with the U.S., giving up nukes is a non-starter.
But you know, there are a lot of people around the world who think that by accumulating nuclear weapons, your country is putting itself at risk of total destruction.
They have the wrong information, says
Korea. The defense secretary insisted the U.S. will not accept a nuclear North Korea. Mattis warned that any use of nuclear weapons by the North would be met with a, quote, massive military response that is effective and overwhelming. Now, as the president prepares to head to the region, North Korean officials say they will not give up their nuclear program. CNN's Will Ripley is in Pyongyang to explain.
As Asia prepares for President Trump's landmark visit, North Korea has been uncharacteristically quiet. No missile launches in a month and a half. No nuclear test, at least not yet. Only North Korea's promise to send a clear message after Trump's menacing speech at the UN last month when he threatened to totally destroy North Korea. At the time, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un vowed to tame the U.S. president with fire. Cha Song-chol is chief engineer of a baby food factory, trying to maintain production levels despite UN sanctions over North Korea's nuclear program. But he says the nukes are here to stay. Sonok, tell them to come to my country and see for themselves.
Do you have hope that someday your leader, Kim Jong-un, could meet the U.S. President Donald Trump?
No, not at all, she says. That meeting cannot happen. It will not happen, because our marshal promised to deal with that deranged lunatic with fire. Ominous words slowly simmering ever since. As Trump's visit to the region looms, many wonder if the situation is about to boil over.
Years after JCPOA Adoption Day. JCPOA is the deal. Adoption Day was October 18, 2015. So by that agreement, on October 19, 2023, they get a green light to develop a nuclear weapon with nuclear ballistic missiles.
Right. Well, let me come back to that. But let's go back to a phrase in that last provision that you just read. And I don't mean to sound like we're in law school parsing contracts, but it says no ballistic missiles designed to carry nuclear warheads. A clear example, as I'll show here in a second, of how badly drafted this agreement is from the American point of view. What Iran says is, oh, my goodness, Our rockets aren't designed to carry nuclear weapons, as if it matters to the rocket part of the missile what's in the nose cone, a balloon, a basketball, or a nuclear weapon. And Iran says, you know, of course they're not designed to carry nuclear weapons because, after all, we don't have a nuclear weapons program. I mean, this is the kind of thing that, that really just makes a mockery out of the idea that this deal is in America's interest. But on the end date for the provisions of the deal, and this point applies to the nuclear deal as well, it's not the end date that's a problem. It's the flaws in the deal and the enforcement of the deal. Let's not forget, Iran is also a party to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which commits it not to seek or possess nuclear weapons. The reason we need this deal at all, in theory, is because Iran has been violating the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty for 25 years or more, just like it's violating this deal. It doesn't matter how many pieces of paper the Iranian regime engages in. They're going to have this nuclear weapons program until they get the capability that North Korea is on the verge of getting right now.
That is, and you talk about the North Korean similarity. The Iranian opposition, the National Council of Resistance of Iran, Maryam Rajavi is the head of that. They issued this statement that says, in part, about this: the clerical regime has devoted a significant budget to its program, while the majority of the Iranian people live below the poverty line. This program is solely for the regime's survival and is against the prime interests of the Iranian people. The clerical regime is spending billions of dollars on its missile program. Do you have any doubt, Ambassador, that spending billions of dollars is not unintended to produce a nuclear weapon?
Well, they know exactly what they're doing, and let's not forget, Iran and North Korea have been working together for 25 years, if not more, from the time that North Korea sold Iran the first Scud missiles. They're both using the same Soviet-era missile technology as they develop and advance their missile capabilities. They're both using the uranium enrichment program that they purchased